Hello and good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome from the Heinrich-Böll Foundation here in the Brussels office. I'm Martin Keim, heading the European Energy Transition Program here in the Brussels office, and I'm very delighted today to moderate this event of the series of Worldwide Pandemic European Responses. Today we will talk a lot about mobility and transport issue. Today's session is actually called European Mobility in the Context of COVID-19. Keeping the green steering wheel steady, and we named this. We choose this name for a reason. Why that is, we will definitely have to have a lot of time later to talk about that. But without further ado, I would like to introduce my very distinguished panelists today. I'm delighted and honored to have on board with me. First of all, Annika Degen from the German office from the EU office from the German Federation of German Public Transport Companies here in Brussels. Thank you for joining us, Annika. Then I am delighted to have Matthew Baldwin from the European Commission. He's the Deputy Director General in the DG Move, which is the department which is responsible for transport and mobility. Thank you for joining us, Matthew. Later, we will also have the great honor to be joined by Georges Gilquinet, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Mobility and the National Railway of Belgium. It's a great pleasure to have him on board. I think he will join us in a bit. So just before we start off this panel, allow me to say a few words about the situation we are in and what brings us to this momentum of a very complex picture of, on the one hand, having the situation of a global pandemic, and on the other hand, being forced in a way to rethink mobility in ways we haven't thought about before. Precisely that is also one of the main tasks here, in Brussels in our office. And I'm very happy to announce to you already the forthcoming European Mobility Atlas, which will be presented next year in February. And so a lot of topics and questions that will be raised today and addressed today will also be taken care of and addressed in the Mobility Atlas. But first of all, let me start with Ms. Annika Degen, who I just introduced to you, and give her the chance for a rough 5 to 10 minutes to give us a short input on her take on COVID-19 and mobility, what is actually at stake.
Okay. Thank you very much for this kind introduction and the opportunity to join your panel today. So I'm representing transport companies from Germany. VDV has around 600 members who offer public transport and rail freight services. So as it's commonly known, I mean, for our transport companies, the past 9 months were different, both in freight and especially in passenger transport has decreased significantly. So we have experienced, or we are experiencing until the end of the year, farebox revenue losses in local public transport of around 3.5 billion euros, and in long distance passenger rail transport more than 1.5 billion euros, as well as rail freight, which has like 300 to 600 million euros of losses because of the COVID crisis. So this is quite a huge impact. And in the month of April, we saw that the number of passengers was reduced by about 70 to 80% compared to the year before. And then over the course of the months of the summer, the demand went up again. We reached levels of up to 80% of the normal passenger numbers by August and September. But now with the second lockdown, if I may call it this way, we see that the numbers are dropping again. And for November and December, we expect that in passenger transport to see only 50 to 60% of the normal numbers that we would see in previous years. So it's really a shame because over the past decades, the trend was really to see increasing numbers of passengers in public transport, although the percentage of the overall population who use public transport stayed more or less stable. So there was not a huge shift towards public transport neither. But in recent years, we see that there's a stronger concern with climate change and air pollution, as well as congestion in cities. And we really see more and more cities calling for modal shift. They want to change the mobility in their territory. So this was actually a perfect opportunity, together with the European Green Deal, to turn things around and to improve the mobility system overall, and to see finally a larger shift towards active mobility, walking and cycling, as well as shared and public mobility, like public transport. So while this trend was interrupted to some extent by the COVID-19 crisis, it is now more important than ever to continue working on modal shift, because, I mean, first of all, climate change is not waiting, and we see that in the end, all the problems we experience, the pandemic as well as the environmental problems, are interlinked. So climate change is not waiting, and it requires fast and very ambitious policy making. And there also seems to be a link between air pollution and the severity of COVID cases. So here again, I think it is important and quite urgent to reduce the most polluting transport modes. And this urge is stronger now than it was before. Let me also add that public transport is an essential public service which offers mobility to all citizens. It connects them to their workplace, and it is offered at affordable prices, which is especially relevant in the current economic crisis that we see. Studies in the past have shown that every euro invested in public transport creates 5 times its value in terms of the local economy and the benefit it brings to the local economy. So public transport investments can also really help with economic recovery, which is another argument in favor of it. Let me perhaps say a word about the mobility behavior we see. You have asked us prior to this event about how we deal with people avoiding public transport. And I understand if people at the moment avoid any crowded places, really, and obviously public transport, in public transport, you're going to meet other people. But I can assure you that we've looked into this over all these months, and we see that a growing number of studies suggest that there's clearly no link between public transport and the spread of COVID-19, at least not more than anywhere else in the public space where you simply meet and interact with other people. Why is transport COVID safe? It is for a number of reasons. People use public transport only for a short while, and we saw in many studies that the length of you lingering in a certain place, in a closed place especially, is determining how much exposure you have to the virus. So because people hop on a bus and after a number of minutes they hop off again and they have arrived, this avoids them being exposed to any potential virus for a long time. Then people don't speak much, and we also saw in studies that the exchange and speaking expels the virus from one person to another. Then there's air conditioning, ventilation through open windows and opening the doors, and our bus companies open all the doors now throughout the pandemic, not just one, in order to let the air circulate. Then there are hygiene measures in place, such as regular disinfecting and cleaning. And of course, the wearing masks is a very important element, both in the vehicles and in the stations. And this is really implemented by the customers in Germany. So we have, fortunately, absolutely no problem with people, only a very, very low percentage of people not wearing their mask properly in public transport. So all these things together lead to the fact that we can really say that anybody who claims that the virus is transmitted in public transport more than in other places is factually wrong. So instead of this, I think we should really work together to win again the trust of customers to come back and return to public transport if they were skeptical for a while. So perhaps a last statement on our policy expectations. VDV has also, like other associations, worked on a position paper looking at the European Union's strategy for smart and sustainable mobility that is coming up in December. And we have looked especially at 3 challenges: climate change, the COVID crisis and digitalization as the three most relevant, let's say, aspects to look at and to suggest policies about. And I personally think that climate change is really the #1 challenge, because it will depend very much on our generation whether or not we can turn things around. We can definitely not wait for another decade going on with business as usual and then see what we can do in 10 years. So the Commission has estimated that in transport we have to reduce 90% of transport-related greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. So that's a huge way, and I think that every year counts on the way to get there. And it cannot be achieved by business as usual. So we really advocate for the avoid, shift and improve principle, because I personally am convinced that we should look at all these three possibilities to turn things around, and all contributions together might finally bring about the big change that we need to see. So in terms of improving, I think the European Commission, for instance, has already done quite a lot, especially if we look at road transport. We see new technologies, digital technologies being promoted, alternative fuels being promoted. The digitalization also helps in the railway sector very much, so this is very welcome. In terms of shift, we see in Europe that there was the aim to shift some of the long distance trips to railways, for instance, which is very welcome. And I think this should continue also in the upcoming year of rail, 2021. But I think that we also need to look more, under the shift angle, in terms of different allocation of road space, who gets how much time and space on the road, the internalization of external costs. We have to set the right incentives to get people out of their private vehicles and really into shared mobility and more active mobility. And this has to be done. And then in terms of avoid, I think this is really kind of a hot tomato. Nobody really dares at talking about avoiding transport, because it can be misunderstood as institutions telling the people to stay at home and not to travel, which I think is a misunderstanding. But there are lots of ways in which avoiding transport can be promoted and really facilitated. We can look at which trips can be avoided simply through better planning or using empty capacities. If you look at freight, we should avoid trucks running empty on the streets, but really try to put a system in place where capacities are used if a vehicle is going anyways into a certain direction. And I think that also the alternatives, like thinking twice about which trips are really needed and which could be replaced through video conferencing, got some positive experience actually during the COVID crisis. So there are many ways in which avoiding transport can be explored without prohibiting mobility. So we in VDV would actually like to see more mobility, but less transport. So mobility in a more efficient way. So the Commission said all initiatives that are coming up in the future must support the Green Deal. And I think this is a very good indication of which way we should go. And we must achieve a significant modal shift towards railways and public transport and active mobility already by 2030. This would be my plea. And let me stop here and maybe get back on more details during the discussion.
Thank you very much, Annika. Thank you for this very comprehensive overlook already of setting the scene. First of all, a very warm welcome now to Georges Quinier, who is, as I said, the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of Mobility in the National Railway of Belgium. We are delighted to have you on board here. Before I go on and hand the floor over to you, Georges, I will just quickly also say a quick word on the comment section. To remind you, the event is co-hosted by the Heinrich-Böll Foundation and the Green European Foundation, and my colleagues from the Green European Foundation are taking kindly charge of the comment section and the technical background. And so, if you have questions, the panelists, please use the comment section and put your questions in there. So now, without further ado, thank you very much for joining us, Georges, and the floor is yours now.
Thanks a lot. Nice to see you and to hear you. I'm Minister for Mobility for 6 weeks. I don't know everything about it, but I have quite a clear view of the situation. Also, as Deputy Prime Minister, and we have a lot of things to do with the COVID crisis. This crisis is a crisis like we have never seen, the most severe crisis since the Second Worldwide War, and this crisis affects all of us in many ways. In the short term, the crisis reveals all the inequalities of our society: domestic violence, clusters in vulnerable groups, and loneliness of older people. As a consequence, there are many emergencies to be dealt with for our government. Sanitary, ensure hospitals can deal with the second wave. Economic, job and revenue losses, or psycho-related health issues like loneliness, depression. This crisis, like in other countries, also impact the mobility of people and goods. And in my opinion, there are three priorities regarding transport and mobility. The first one is the question of the security in the transport. Ensure that people can still circulate safely. We have implemented many protocols with our railway company in public transportation, which enable our population to still use buses, trains, metros, and trams. Second priority is to let people move. We have to reserve transport for the people we really need, the ones that cannot work from home. This is crucial because essential jobs tends to be performed by more vulnerable people. I think of nurses, care assistants, cashiers, garbage collector, but also students who have to go to school, because in Belgium we made the choice, like in other countries, to let our schools open. It is very important for the youngers of us. And three, we want to ensure that no one is left behind. More generally, and this is closely linked to my previous point, the most exposed group, women, older people, self-employed people, must not be left behind during this crisis, especially not by political decision. The way we manage this crisis as Belgian authority reveals and defines who we are as society. And of course, in a long-term perspective, as ecologists, we want the post-COVID world to be different from the pre-crisis situation. We don't want to relaunch the economy as it was before, because it will never, ever be the same again, but rather redeploy our society on ecological grounds. This crisis is clearly a threat for our societies, but can and must be an opportunity to make societies greener, fairer, more democratic, and more resilient. I don't know if I have to answer the question, which were.
We can come back to these later. Actually, it's
okay. It was my introduction.
Thank you very much for this. Thank you very much, Ms. Georges Duclinet. So it was said mobility rather than transport. Matthew Baldwin, do you agree? Let me give you the chance to provide us with a short input from the Commission.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and great to be. I'm sorry I'm not Harold Reuters in so many ways, but I am who I am, and I'm Matthew Baldwin, and I am delighted to be with you. I'm the coordinator for road safety and sustainable mobility. So these subjects are right on point for me. And I think the problem we're going to have in this panel is we're all going to agree far too much, but that's life. I like the slogan. I'll take it with me, Annika. We are writing, as you mentioned, a new strategy for sustainable and smart mobility. We're always on the market for a good new slogan in the European Commission. Right? I like it. Just to briefly say a few words on top of what's already been said, COVID's had a massive impact, as has already been said, on European transport and European society. And it's had an impact on what we do. Just to give you one illustration of that, if you think back to the days of March, when we started to see panic buying in a lot of European stores, people worrying, not just being selfish, but people worrying that essential goods and medicines were not going to get through. And what we did, we stepped in at the European level to say, okay, we need to keep those supply chains open. We need to keep freight moving across national frontiers. And we came with this concept called the green lanes, which says that as a goal, that there should be delays of no more than 15 minutes for a truck going across national frontiers. And we're very proud of what's been achieved. I think in 90% of the big border crossings of Europe, that target's been achieved. And the signal then is all the way back down the supply chains to everybody that the goods will be in the stores. You don't need to take all the toilet paper or all the milk. It's going to come through. And I think it's been an important lesson for all of us about the signals we can send to European society about keeping supply chains moving. The second sort of general set of comments, and by the way, we're going to broaden that into a multimodal green lanes, which is exciting, to make that concept work also for rail freight, to make it for the short sea shipping, and also for thinking about aviation freight as well. I also want to pick up what Annika was saying about public transport, which is a very different angle to come in on, and here to talk about the plight a little bit of the public transport operators and the public transport workers. I mean, the numbers I have are really startling, that EU public transport is losing up to 90% of its rider revenues by the end of 2020. It's about 40 billion euros. Terrible numbers from individual cities as well. And Annika gave some numbers from the German perspective. And this is partly because you as public transport operators have kept the system going. You've kept the essential services moving. I mean, right here in Brussels, you know, the trams and the buses have rumbled through the night to keep the essential workers that the minister has mentioned, the nurses, in their posts. And let's be clear, some of these bus drivers have died as a result of COVID. And we shouldn't forget this. We should never forget the transport workers, including the seafarers, who have been stuck in many cases in different parts of the world with expired visas. And again, at the European level, we need to do what we can to help them. And I like also what Annika said about the perception of risks. And I think that applies in lots of different areas. In public transport, I entirely agree with it. Every study I've read shows that we can, and congratulations, Minister, you are applying the safety protocols for Belgian public transport. Nothing in this new terrible life is risk-free, but we need to make sure that taking a bus, taking a plane is no worse than a trip to the supermarket, or no worse in terms of risk. And that way we can slowly, little by little, when we're not in lockdown mode, get back to normal society. And I think that's very important, because if we don't do that, the risk is the new normal is going to be worse than the old normal, and that we will have less active mobility in our streets. That's been one of the huge pluses, I think, in Brussels and across Europe. We've seen more people taking their bikes, more people walking, the authorities responding with bike lanes and pedestrianized zones and local speed limits. And if we're not careful, people will be too scared to take public transport. They'll jump back in their cars. And as a result, people will be too scared to walk or take their bikes. And we will have we will go from lockdown to gridlock. It's not an original phrase, but it's one I'm using regularly. And then on the Green Deal, if I may say just 2 words on that. It will be very easy for an institution like the European Commission to say, oh, well, everything's off now with COVID. We've got to get the economy back on its feet. We have to get back to the old normal as quickly as possible. And please note that the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has not taken that line. In her recent State of the Union speech, she restated the targets that we have to reduce 90% of our transport emissions by 2050. That means at least a 55% reduction by 2030. And why? Because 25% of our emissions are coming from transport, 20% just from road transport alone. So we can't postpone that by 1 year, by 1 day. And so we'll be coming forth, as you mentioned, with the sustainable and smart mobility strategy, which takes its cue from that pledge from President von der Leyen. We're not backing down. It's a false dichotomy to talk about the economy on the one hand versus the Green Deal on the other. We will come with proposals to make all of our modes sustainable, to give us, and recognizing that some modes are going to take longer than others, to make sure we have sustainable alternatives available, and that those alternatives are properly incentivized, which means, frankly speaking, bringing the market to transport, making sure that there is road pricing, so that the true external costs, which Annika has also mentioned, of road transport are borne by the users and not by society. The costs of CO2 emissions, the costs of terrible air quality, the costs of congestion, the cost of road crashes. All of these things add up to 1 trillion euros a year. And it is time, high time, that we really dealt with those and really started to internalize them in the terrible jargon of transport economists. The last point, of course, is that the cities and what we do about cities, the urban dimension to transport is going to flow logically, I think, from the sustainable and smart mobility strategy. And we will come forward next year with plans to revamp our urban mobility package, which has been around since 2013. It's a magnificent set of ideas already, but we're going to advance them, develop them, and rethink them, also in the context of the 10T regulation. Annika mentioned the European Year of Rail. That's going to be an exciting event on 2021 and a key part of our sustainability agenda. So I want to pause on these introductory remarks by saying, full steam ahead. There is no alternative. We must make progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you for this excellent overview from the Commission. I would like to get back to Annika now with a sort of first take on the expectations on some of the proposals that have been mentioned. Then we would go back to Georges to have an overview of what Belgium plans actually imply. The European Year of Rail has actually been mentioned now twice already. We will certainly talk about the role of trains and railways. But first of all, Annika, what is your take on the European Green Deal, and especially obviously the transport side of it, the forthcoming sustainable mobility strategy, but also the sort of revamping exercise that Matthew has mentioned with the urban mobility package?
In favor of the European Commission's proposal, aren't you, Annika?
Sorry? What did you say, Matthew?
I cheekily said you're in favor of the European Commission's proposals, although you haven't yet seen them.
I can't subscribe to that. I'm only a believer once I see it on paper. No, I think that I'm very proud of your Commission President. I mean, I was so delighted when I also heard her recent address to the European Parliament, in which she stated we need a green recovery. It was a really inspiring speech. So I'm happy that you have this kind of leader at the moment and that she's taking this line that you mentioned. We are always a little bit critical when it comes to which solutions in the end will have the largest benefit. And of course, in transport and especially rail, the infrastructure costs are huge, and we are very grateful for all the contributions that the Commission has already done in this field. It is absolutely necessary because it takes such a long time to prepare the network of tomorrow to continue and to perhaps increase the infrastructure investments. We need, to look at the 10T network, obviously, but also missing links and new cross-border connections that can connect cities or towns that are currently not connected to the railway network. We can link these up. We need to modernize the transport system. And especially in railways, let me mention the automated digital coupling, which could be a fair project for the Commission to take on and to support across Europe, because this can really boost the rail freight and make it more efficient and faster and more autonomous in the end. So I think there, in terms of infrastructure, there's a lot to be done. Also, when we look at buses, we need charging and refueling for alternative fuels for the buses. We need this infrastructure, and there's an opportunity for Europe to help us when they work on the DAFI directive. But we are a little bit skeptical sometimes when it comes to looking at technology and especially at the digitalization to solve some of these problems, because in the end, whether or not a customer can get his ticket through a large IT platform or from the public transport operator, this is just the side of ticket selling. But behind this is a physical transport, and we need to ensure that the physical transport, the movement from A to B, is done through sustainable modes of transport, in both in freight and in passenger transport. And this has to remain at the center of all the deliberations, because this is what will bring about the change. And so I'm happy about Commission tackling road charges. We're also interested in energy prices, although this is not a DG Move dossier per se, but I think that if we look at the taxation of fossil fuels, that is likely to increase, then look at how public transport and railways are taxed with possibly lower rates or exemptions because of their sustainability advantage. That can help the modal shift as well. Yes, and in terms of the Sustainable Urban Mobility Package, we are very, very happy that this already exists, and we're looking forward to the revision next year. I think it's absolutely key to strengthen public transport authorities wherever possible. And I think an association like Polis mentioned once that it's those that public transport authorities that have a sustainable urban mobility plan that were the fastest to respond to the COVID crisis and to make, let's say, a good use of the opportunities that were in the lockdown. And so this was just one example that showed how relevant these plans are. And I think they will be increasingly important in the future, also when it comes to linking cities with the environment, with the rural areas that surround them, to improve these links, because commuting is responsible for a large part of the traffic, and people who live in the city are often able to live without their own private car as long as they move within the city. But then if they want to leave the city, or those who live around it want to enter the city, that's where a lot of car traffic is generated.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Annika. Speaking of authority, as you mentioned it, back to Georges now. Just to maybe put this a bit in perspective, and to avoid also that we have a conversation that is typically Brussels-based in our perspectives. Georges, you have, as you mentioned, that you've taken over the role as the Minister for Mobility in Belgium some roughly 6 weeks ago. So that's a very paradoxical situation where you take over the role in a situation. Do you take over the role of a mobility minister in a situation where there's a global standstill? There's nothing moving, actually, which is kind of a paradox for me. So I just wanted to know what are your plans now for, because let me rephrase this. We as a German Green Foundation would obviously dream of a green minister for transport. If we look to Germany and the kind of experience we had on a political level, we can only say there's a lot of hope if we look into your direction and see a green transport minister. So I would be just interested, what kind of strategies, what kind of priorities would you like to set during your ruling term now? I think we can't hear you, Georges. Might have to unmute yourself.
I said, thank you for your words. There's also a lot of pressure from me, so much hope, but we'll do our best. And as you said, it's quite a paradoxical situation. As Minister of the Mobility, I need to ensure that buses and trains operate. And I want to have more people on the train and bus or by bike and so on. And in the meantime, as a Deputy Prime Minister, I must make sure that people stay and work from home to strike against the COVID. But joke aside, next Tuesday I will present to the Belgian House of Representatives my plans. Sorry, for the future of mobility in Belgium. And as a Green Minister, I want to be the Minister of Trains, the Minister of Bikes, the Minister of Co-mobility, not the Minister of cars, as you know. The coalition agreements with the other parties here in Belgium foresees huge investment for trains. It was needed in order to have more people and goods transport by rail. As you know that it's better for environment, people's health, and even the economy. Car traffic and congestion costs every year between 1 to 2% to the Belgian GDP, and it's responsible in Belgium for over 10,000 premature deaths. Speaking of trains, we want to adopt, and it's needed, a long-term perspective, because investment in the train sector takes years to be discussed, negotiated, and implemented. And my ambition is to have, like in other countries, like Switzerland, like I think also Austria. My ambition is to have a train every 30 minutes in every station in the country, and every 10 minutes around the greatest cities like Brussels or Antwerp. I'm also committed to the modal transfer, to the shift from the use of the private car to other means of transport. You know that in Belgium there are too many cars are given to workers as a loan. It's for us a problem. A loan must be paid in euro, not in cars or fuel. Thus, you have to have more public transportation, such as buses and train or car sharing also. Besides, we should also collectively rethink the way we move. In the aftermath of the pandemic of COVID-19, working from home must be, like in other countries, encouraged, while keeping a clearly defined work-life balance. Like in other countries, or highway company has suffered from the COVID crisis. In the coalition agreement, we have foreseen an amount of 300 million euro to cover the loss of revenue induced by the COVID, and I'm working to have billions in investment, in the rail for the future. We have planned further investment to make trains the center of our future mobility, and we are working to be ready as a country to work in the next generation plan from Europe, and in the Green Deal to receive to be able to do that. Besides, I welcome the initiative of the European Commission to make 2020 the European Year of Rail. More people and goods transport by rail is a goal we shared with our government. And speaking of a better railway connection throughout Europe, we want to relaunch night train in Europe. When I was younger, I recall visiting capital cities of Europe connected by night trains. It was a cool way to promote our continent and our diversity, and we have to have more connection between Brussels and the other country, like there's those of the people who are listening to us.
Great, thank you very much, Josh. Speaking of now rail and the question of what kind of priorities would you set? You mentioned that trains are definitely going to be at the center of your priorities. Just wanted to give the chance to Matthew first to comment a little bit on the kind of expectations we will see with the European Year of Rail? Because if you talk to some of the stakeholders, it is something that has a kind of mitigated resonance here in the Brussels community. But maybe Matthew, you could talk about a couple of points, and before I then hand over back to Annika, we will then take a couple of questions from the comment sections.
Thank you, Martin. Yeah, no, we're struggling to find things to disagree on, but let me amplify some points here made by Georges and by Annika on the European Year of Rail. I mean, we shouldn't oversell it. It is going to be a year of promotion and a year of explanation and publicity for this vital means of transport. We want to put it in the spotlight. We've got agreement now between the Parliament and the Council on how much we can fund it, and it's going to be a decent amount of funding to enable us to do a whole series of projects and events and initiatives to promote rail. 3 specific things, which I think are quite neat. One is that we're going to do some feasibility studies on a role to measure rail connectivity. This is this elusive concept, but it's very important once you get outside cities, because too often, including in Belgium, if I may say, Minister, sometimes you struggle to get connecting points by rail, so the people who want to use the trains can't always do that. The second is the idea of a European label to promote goods and products that are transported by rail, which is a neat idea. And then last but not least, to underline again what we have already done and how we should use more, the European policy for rail. The 4th railway package is about trying to develop new competition on the railways to reduce the costs, to reduce the administrative burdens for companies on the rail. We've got a provisional agreement on the 4th railway package. We now need to see that blessed by the Parliament and Council before it comes into force. The point on funding, which the Minister touched on, is hugely important. And whenever I talk about transport in my sort of over-enthusiastic way, people say, well, that's great, but where's the money? And now I've got the answer. On top of existing flows through the CEF, the Connecting European Facility, on top of the money that flows through cohesion funding, we have this new exciting kid on the block called the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which is a 750 billion euro honeypot. And it's wonderful for me the first time to be able to address directly a minister with responsibility for this, because the ball is now in the court of the member states to establish their plans. And we are here in DG Move passionately in support of investments in railways, in public transport. We want to signal that, in our view, this RRF funding can be used for things like bike lanes, can be used in cities, and it can be used because it's about not just the green transition, but the jobs transition. And when you look at things like the employment intensity of building a bike lane, it's 130% in terms of its employment effect of normal road spending. So build a bike lane in Brussels or in Liège or anywhere else, and you get immediately an attraction for active mobility, and you get people back to work. And these things can also be done quite quickly. They are shovel ready in our terrible jargon. Annika mentioned the last point, Martin, I will stop. Annika mentioned the SUMPs, the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plans. We do want to develop them. We're very proud of this model that's existed since 2013, or over 1,000 Sustainable Urban Mobility Plans. And we want to do more to integrate public transport and active mobility. Again, the sustainable alternatives to using your private car in the city. But you make an important point about the connection between the urban and the périurbain, the rural areas. Because, look, if we're realistic, for many years to come, the car is going to carry on being ubiquitous outside the city. So how do we manage that hinge between the cities and the rural areas? Yes, it's about better public transport, and Minister, we'd love to see it, but also it's about pragmatic alternatives like car parks on the edge of cities with free public transport or free use of a bike to come into the city. So you don't have to bring your car in. And that way we can increase the incentive on people not to use their cars in cities. And that is a big, big plus. Thanks.
Thank you, Matthew. Now back to Annika. Maybe you would like to comment on George's and Matthew's inputs, and then you could go ahead, and then I'll ask a couple of questions from the comment sections. Just please keep in mind that we are slowly but steadily coming to an end now. So please try to be as concise as possible. Thank you.
Absolutely. No, I was just very impressed by George's statements and his, sharing the experience of what they're planning to do in Belgium, putting rail at the center of the mobility system, and that is wonderful. And I'm impressed because I was thinking, how can we win back the passengers? I think we need two things. We need information, so we have to communicate a lot about how safe is it to use public transport, about the hygiene measures that are being taken, about the low risk of transmission when all people wear their mask, and so on. And we in VDV were actually having a huge campaign about this to help the whole sector and together with the ministries to communicate about this point. But the other element is to working on the capacities of the system and in a way preparing for the modal shift. So for the time being, we need capacities to enable people to stay, to keep the distance that they need in order to avoid transmission of the virus. So right now the vehicles are relatively empty and it is still possible. But once people come back, we want to have more capacities. We want to have more capacities in Germany, for instance, for the students that go to school, because at peak hours, then the buses are very full. So we start, seeing additional buses added, and the same applies to all other types of vehicles. So if we work on the modal shift, like you do in Belgium at the moment, and you start creating these capacities and improving the system, this will help you also in the long term. It will help in the short term because of the distances that can be kept, but in the long term, because once people, take up mobility again and are moving around, you want to ensure that more people can be taken in railways and trams and metros and so on.
Okay, thank you very much, Annika, and also thank you for being brief. Now, I would like to get some of the questions that have been posted in the comment sections. Maybe I'll start off with a reversed order to get George back on in this round now, because I think this question is specifically asked from a Belgian perspective. Let me just read it out loud. It's ambition to phase out fiscal advantage for salary cars in Belgium is not reflected in the governmental agreement. Will you be able to still make a change on this important issue for Belgian mobility?
I hope so. It was my beginning. Salary cars are a huge problem in Belgium. Each year, the European Commission says to Belgium, you have a problem with your salary cars. There are too many cars in Belgium and too many salary cars, and this is a bit a part of our history, of our social history. It was a way to give people loans, but without the charge of social charge of the loans. And we have to get out of the system. As Greens, we are. It's what we want, but it's difficult to find other parties to do that so fast that we want. Our agreement to go in a government is if two important things about salary cars. First of all is you have to electrify the system. There are questions about it, but you have to have less polluting cars on the way, salary cars. But we want to change the system with a global fiscal reform, which makes that you pay people in euro and not in cars. As a minister for mobility in Belgium, I have to work to give people the freedom of not taking their car, to have a good system of trains, to have like was said, a station where you can come with a bike, take a train and take a bus, take a dealt car, a shared system of sharing cars for the last kilometers, and we are working on it to make a revolution about it. And I think another question is the trains who are starting earlier and finishing in the night, because if you want that people make the choice not to have their own cars, you have to give a good service, a good mobility service, and we are working on it. And here in Brussels, with a lot of new companies who are thinking the future of mobility as a service, not as it's that you have to buy like a car who cost a lot, who was taking a lot of place in our streets, who are polluting. But it's a revolution. We have to help people to change their mind, and it's my what I have to do as a new minister for mobility, to give another vision of the mobility.
Thank you, George. And now maybe a comment from Matthew on George's points, but also I'd like to link that with a comment from our views. There's one comment in the section here, which is about the road pricing policies. So the question was, what should we expect from road pricing policies in the smart and sustainable mobility strategy, considering the Eurovignette reform is already underway, albeit very slowly? So that question, maybe you could link that or refer to that one later, Matthew, and then maybe just a general comment on what you've heard from George.
Yeah, I'll try and pick these up generally. I'm very interested to hear what the minister said there, and I thought, honestly, if you listen to that objectively, it's such a fair statement of what you said. And underlying it, if I may, and not to put words into your mouth, Minister, it's not about demonizing individual car drivers, but making sure that we give them the package of incentives and alternatives so that things change. And I think sometimes the polemic, including right now in Brussels, gets so out of whack, as if people are deliberately trying to make life difficult for car drivers or whatever. It's not. It's about trying to create a sustainable and a green city. So first of all, yes, we do keep beating you up on this question about the salary cars in the European semester process. To be fair, you're also not alone in that. Go to a green city like Copenhagen. There's a lot of cars coming into Copenhagen every day. And they like to pretend they're always on their bicycles. So you're not completely alone. And what you're talking about there is giving people the incentives to do things differently. We are very keen on our side to help you do that by providing the right framework to facilitate these things, to fund, again, back to the Recovery and Resilience Fund. Please make sure that Belgium comes heavily with lots and lots of green transport things.
I'm working on it. I'm working.
Thank you very much. Right with you. And we will try to do our part as good citizens of Belgium. In the Commission, sometimes we sit there, these overpaid bureaucrats, but we have made a commitment, which not a lot of people have picked up on, to green the Commission, carbon neutral Commission by 2030. So we're looking forward to discussing, I guess, firstly with the region of Brussels, but why not also with the federal authorities, to look at the different areas in terms of our commuting, in terms of our energy efficiency of buildings. All of those things are on the table, because we have to, if we're thinking globally about the European Green Deal, we also have to act locally. Now then, the tricky question coming for me. So what about road pricing in the mobility strategy? And Hannah, in your question, you're right. The Eurovignette reform is a slow work in progress. Again, I think the goal here is not for the European Union to tell everyone what to do, but to provide the right framework, the facilitating framework, to enable the external costs to be challenged. I don't think we'll get very far if we say everyone's got to do road pricing. You've got to do it now, and you've got to do it this way. We have to find a framework which actually enables people to do it successfully. And I think Eurovignette's a good framework for that. We also we are looking with interest at what's happening with urban vehicle access restrictions and to see if there's ways we can do that. But also there's some pressures on us to try to harmonize urban vehicle access restrictions as well, so they're done on comparable principles and more understandable to users. So lots of things we can do in partnership with probably the last thing I'll get to say, with the public transport authorities, with the member states, and of course with all stakeholders. And I'll shut up now. Thanks for the chance to join this panel.
Thank you very much, Matthew. I will now hand the floor over back to Annika, and then I'll also give her the chance to answer to, first of all, one last question, and also make a final statement for this round, so we can conclude this this fantastic panel. Thank you. So the question, first of all, is, maybe you've partly answered it a bit, but you can come back to that. Statistics show that people tend to prioritize the car over public transport in the current situation. Are there already strategies being developed or maybe applied as well to make them use public and transport, to make them use public transport again?
Okay, yeah. So if this refers to the COVID situation, then I think I've already mentioned a little bit what we are trying to do is to communicate very clearly and to look into the, first of all, the question, is there a risk in public transport and how can we mitigate it? And then to be very open about the measures that are taken by our members and about the risk and the fact that there is currently no elevated risk in using public transport. So it is relatively safe if you take the necessary measures like wearing a mask. We are ensuring that people wear the mask because obviously you can wear your mask, but you may be concerned that others don't. So controls play a role, and we're in contact with the authorities to ensure that there are fines attached to it if you don't wear a mask. So this is going relatively well. I can speak for Germany here, but really the people are doing all of this. So I think that rebuilding trust to communication is one thing, and then to ensure that over the long term we've got the capacities to to attract people to transport by giving them the space and making it convenient, and using more digital tools as well that can enhance the system overall. I mean, that is the second step after COVID and globally, is to make public transport more attractive, to make it the #1 choice of citizens if they think I need to get from A to B. How do I do that?
Thank you, Annika. Now for Georges, a last remark from your side, maybe a couple of perspectives.
Yes, I was very pleased to be there. As I said at the beginning, I'm here from 6 weeks. It was a lot of work to be ready. We are with my team was still not complete, but we are working for introducing projects in the next generation program from the European Union, and it's very important for us to give money back to the railway and to give a better service for the people, and to create the new mobility. And my slogan was we have said for a long time, my car is my mobility, my car is my freedom. I want to say my train is my freedom. I want to liberate people from their own car. You always need a car, but you don't need to be the owner of your car. You have to receive a mobility as a service, and we want to create this in Belgium. And I am very pleased to receive the confidence of the people and the government and the middles to do it. But I hope I can be still more concrete in a few months and come back to a webinar to tell you what we have achieved to do.
Thank you very much, George. We're looking forward to that, and we wish you all the best for this very exciting and I think also very challenging mission. Maybe Matthew, a last word from your side?
Well, I said too much, but seeing as you asked me, looking forward to working with the Minister on Mobility as a Service. We didn't talk about the digital side of this, and we think that's a hugely incentivizing possibility. And noting Annika's concerns about that, I'm kind of like you, Annika. I'm also pretty analog as a person. Let's also do the things we know we can do now, as well as looking at some of these other alternatives. But I think there's some great possibilities. Looking forward to working with you all on this.
Okay, then it's my pleasure to conclude this fantastic panel today. Thank you very much to all of the speakers. Thank you very much for listening and being active in the comments. We're looking forward to host other events together with the. Also, thank you very much, my colleagues from the Green European Foundation, and here my colleagues at HBS. Have a good afternoon. Bye bye, everyone.
Bye.